Hey, remember when Superman fought the Incredible Hulk? Or when Batman teamed up with Daredevil and Spider-Man to take down crime? Well, DC and Marvel just announced they are reprinting their classic crossover collections into two oversized hardcovers. Now, the DC vs. Marvel Omnibus and DC vs. Marvel The Amalgam Age are both available for pre-order right now at Organic Price Books. So if you want to learn about Dark Claw or the original Spider-Boy, go ahead and place your pre-order. You'll get over 30% off and you'll save $2 every time with code BJKicks at checkout. Just visit comicsaredope.com/crossover. That's comicsaredope.com/crossover. All right, guys. So usually I like to just start these off by introducing my guest by reading a bio or something, but I got to tell you guys this story. So I'm on Twitter, and you guys know I kind of suck at social media. Like I get up there because I have to. You're supposed to promote yourself and so on. So I'm posting interviews, and I got a direct message from a guy, and he's like, "Hey, if you're interested in checking out my comic, I'd love to send it to you." And I'm like, let's do it, because I'm trying to check out more comics. Like that's my mantra for 2024. Read more comics. And so I read this comic, and it's not like, if I had seen it on the shelf, I probably wouldn't have picked it up, just because I typically don't do like high fantasy adventure comics all the time. But I open up this comic, I'm reading this file, and it is just amazing. It feels like some of those Netflix shows that my wife just loves to watch so much. And it opens with this awesome credit sequence, and I'm like, all right, I'm hooked. And man, it was just such a good issue. I was like, look, we've got to talk about this. Like, please come on the podcast. And so here to talk to me is the writer of When the Blood Dries, Gary Moloney. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me. And clearly, your wife has excellent taste.
She does. She does. I sent her the PDF as well. She's like, "Oh, this is really good." Like, she's glued. Yeah, she's all into just all of like, she was watching The Witcher and Game of Thrones and all that type of stuff. Like, she loves anything that's set in some sort of medieval time.
Hmm.
Um, it's always like this sort of old English and things like that, right? It's just, for me, I'm like big on like superhero action and stuff, but her, like, that's all up her alley. But I'm probably putting the cart before the horse, probably overselling right now. I want to kind of back up a little bit. Just for the audience, those who may not be familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into comics?
So, yeah, for me, I started properly pursuing comics, seriously in around 2017 or 2018,
Mm,
as a writer. So before then, I'm someone who's read comics in some shape or form for most of their life.
mm,
Like, just like, you know, books,
mm,
prose and all that. That comics have been a part of my life, since I was a small kid,
mm.
going to libraries and things like that. You know, we have probably not the same comic book, store culture in Ireland. We have slightly different, where a lot of people get their comics through the newsstands and news agents.
Mm.
So growing up, you would have had reprints of a lot of Marvel and DC stuff. You would have had a lot of tie-in material and licensed material. So I would have grown up reading a lot of that stuff, particularly when the Marvel movies, the first generation of them, between the X-Men and Spider-Man and 2003 Daredevil, when those started hitting,
Mm.
I would have been just the right age to start reading comics actively. And so, obviously, as you can imagine, when those came out, there was a big push with the reprint material. And that
Right.
was also when Ultimate Spider-Man launched too. So that
Mm.
would have really, from Bendis and Bagley, so that really would have gotten me hooked into it. And over the years, I'd always tried my hand in, a bit like any kid, drawing in their copybook, like try making their own comics or writing their
Right.
own stories.
Mm.
That was always a part of my life too, whether it was from a prose point of view or whether it's from comics.
Mm.
And then I had a very, well, I consider it a formative experience when I was about 15 or 16, in that, being someone who did a lot of prose writing, because I really didn't, I didn't really know, what, how do you make a comic? Like
Mm,
you'd read a comic book and you'd see, okay, story by Bendis, art by Bagley,
right.
but I never really saw how that actually could come together, and I hadn't seen what a script looked like.
Mm,
But then the Cork City Library, where I'm from, uh, one year when I was 15 or 16, had this, and it was the first year they'd run it, this graphic novel project. And the idea was that young writers and young artists in the city would come together. They would be each group would be coached by a professional in their respective fields. So a professional writer who had some comic experience, and the same for the artist side of things.
mm,
And what you did in that workshop and that program was that they brought you what a script looked like, and they showed you step by step how you create a comic. And then you would be teamed up with one writer would be teamed up with one artist in the group,
mhm.
and you would produce an anthology. And at the end of it, you would have a complete 4-page story. And
Wow.
so, yeah, it's if for someone who's 15, 16, have you never seen how a comic is made, like for your kind of your local library, the place that you normally just go to study, do your homework, but also obviously get books out. Like that
Mm,
was amazing.
yeah.
And so at the age of 15, I had this experience of putting together, of seeing what a script looked like. How would you break it down to panels? Why might you do this? Why might you do that?
Mm,
It was, a very kind of base level side of things, a base level introduction, but
mm,
it demystified it in a way that, a lot of times people don't get that opportunity, and they kind of see it as, a very kind of magical, a very kind of, involved thing. But it
yeah.
allowed me to see, okay, well, that's how you make comics. And from there, I kind of always had at the back of my mind, I really want to do this. I want to give it a go, make my own stories.
Mm,
But as your listeners and your viewers are probably aware as well, there's a lot of, when it comes to making comics,
mm,
is obviously you need the opportunity, but you need to, particularly if you're a writer, it's not like being an artist and that you can essentially go off and do it yourself. So you need to, if you want to try to break into comics, there are very few opportunities for people who are writing scripts to actually have those scripts seen and considered by publishers,
mm,
or considered by someone who has the ability to help you make a comic. You
right.
really have to go off, like the best way to make comics is to go off and make comics,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that the best way to do that is to team up with artists. But that also entails, being able to pay them, because people should be paid for the work they do. And there's far too much, oh, working for exposure and things like that that goes around in this industry.
Yeah.
And as a friend of mine is want to say, you know, yeah, but people die of exposure every day. Like, so it took a while for me to be able to actually, despite there being a clear will there, and there being some opportunities for me to pitch, shorter things or to have scripts considered, it took me a while to essentially have the opportunity to have the resources to be able to pursue it actively. And so
Mm,
when I got my first job, my first major job after college, I suddenly had time to do it, and I also had, the resources to do it.
mm,
And in the interim period, I'd also been working with a number of comics, journals and websites, as a
okay.
way of kind of scratching that itch and
Mm,
really exploring the craft of comics as well.
yeah.
Because if every week you've got to review 2 or 3 comics, and you've got to consider, what you like about them, what you dislike about them, then you can, deconstruct them and
Mm,
figure out how they work, what makes a good comic, what makes a bad comic, what is your taste, why do you like those kind of things, and then you can pursue them on that basis. So even when I wasn't making comics, I was trying to figure out ways to make comics and finding opportunities to talk about them in a way
mm,
so that, when the opportunity came knocking, I kind of knew what I wanted to do.
right. And so, did you find that criticizing isn't the word, reviewing comics or becoming like a sort of critic in a way, it helps you in your craft, like just identifying the good, identifying the bad. Um, how do you look at someone else's work and take away lessons that'll help you in your own?
Definitely, I think it's a very useful exercise for anyone,
Mm,
even if you're not doing it on a kind of professional level, to really kind of sit down and analyze, well, why you like a thing and
mm,
what makes it work for you.
mm.
I think that a lot of creators benefit from, saying sitting down with say their favorite comic or comic that really spoke to them, being like, okay, well, why did it do that? But also, more importantly, how did it do that?
Right.
Because a lot of times you'll connect emotionally with a piece of fiction or a comic.
Mm,
And on some levels, it'll be, yes, purely the story of it
mm,
will be there, but also the storytelling can be part of that experience, be part of why it made you feel that way. And
mm,
really sitting down and trying to, reverse engineer how it did that, it will, take a bit of the magic out of it in the end.
yeah.
You'll never read a comic the same way once you start making them.
Right.
But I found it very useful from a craft perspective in really examining, what made a good comic from my perspective,
Mm,
what didn't work, what took me out of a comic. So
mm,
that if I'm reading through it, and say for example the lettering was off,
mm,
even if it was a otherwise good comic,
mm,
if everything else had been right, it was the kind of story I liked, the kind of writer I liked, the kind of artist I like. If something like that was off, that would pull me out of the experience, and then that would tell me and reinforce, oh, lettering is super important, and
mm,
it can be the best comic in the world, but if the lettering pulls you out of the experience, or if there's something about the color or something about the panel work that really doesn't work,
mm,
then that is something you need to consider.
mm,
So I found it very, very useful. And again, because comics reviewing for a lot of those websites was a numbers game, you got to see a lot of stuff and a lot of variety of stuff.
yeah.
And I really started doing that when DC did their rebirth initiative. So I think that was 2016, 2017, when obviously it was a couple of years after the new 52, but they essentially did another launch of
Right.
loads
Brand
of
new
different issues,
titles.
brand new titles, new number ones. So not
Mm,
only was I review, and my job, or one of my jobs I had, was I had a couple of beats. So I had a couple of indie beats. I think I was covering Boom for a long time.
mm,
But when the rebirth thing happened, one of the assignments I got was like, okay, you're going to review every single number one, and you're going to do it on a weekly basis. So
uh,
as they're coming out, so suddenly not only am I looking at comics and trying to reverse engineering them, what makes them work, what doesn't. But I'm doing that for new series too, or series that are designed to pitch you or designed to sell you on a concept for a
mm,
long time. Because that's the entire point of doing a line wide relaunch like that, is to
mm,
be able to give those opportunities. So I learned a lot from that too. But I think it's the fact, like, if you look at people who are working in the industry at the moment, people like David Pepos, a lot of those guys started as comic journalists, comic reviewers,
right.
and it tells in their work that they're people who've put in the man hours just studying the craft.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I just talked to David Pepos last week, and we talked about how he was doing journalism before, and he talked about how journalism sort of helped him build the confidence to go into writing. I just saw a video. BBC posted a video of Alan Moore saying a lot of the same things you just said, just about the importance of being a reader to the craft of writing, right? Like, he believes like the degree to which you read or are a reader, it's a direct correlation between like that and how much or how well you do in writing. Because like you said, you're developing your palate. It's almost like, you can't be a great chef if you only want to eat cheeseburgers, like, I mean, you might be a great burger chef, but you don't get to like play with the diversity of different food items if you're only consuming one thing. There's a professor at Harvard here in the States. His name is Henry Louis Gates. And he talks a lot about like this idea of a double consciousness, right? Like it's one thing to see someone who is really good at doing a thing, but it's another to see someone who is really good at doing a thing, but also really good at explaining the thing that they're doing, right? Like I think of like someone like a Kobe Bryant. He had that show Detail, and he's like breaking down film of all these other people, or even LeBron. LeBron's got a podcast now, and he's like going through with the whiteboard, showing different sets and things like that. And it's like that just takes a whole different level, like of to be able to run and jump and do that that at that athletic level, but then to be able to say, I made this move because he made that move, and usually he would make the other move. Like that's crazy. So, but yeah. So to me, what you're saying makes total sense. Just as an analogy from for other things, right? Like if you're going to do something well, study other people who have done it well and try to pick apart what you like, what you dislike. I review comics now, but it's harder. It's harder for me because it's like I'm reviewing comics, but I'm only reviewing them from a fan perspective, and often I don't feel like I have the language to tell you why I like or dislike something. It's usually like just like a gut feel, right? It's like I hate the final score at the end. Like, okay, I like the art, I like the writing, I like the pacing. Um, Okay, is it an 8, 9, 10? I don't know. That number seems arbitrary. But the more I read, the more it's like, well, compared to this thing that I really loved, this is kind of like, it's a little bit lower. So then if this is the best thing I've ever read, then this is a 10. And now that thing that's a little bit lower, maybe that's an 8 or a 9 or whatever. But
Mm.
it's weird. It's weird to try to score art. Um,
No, you're dead
how
right. You're
Go ahead.
no, you're dead right. Like, I mean, it's one of the things where I think over a long time of reviewing comics, like I eventually moved away from trying to put scores in them because
Mhm.
it's so arbitrary. And a lot of say like if you look at like criticism in a lot of other media, or like, literary criticism, you
Mhm.
don't, say read a novel or like say read something for the Booker Prize and then all right 3 stars or 7 stars and stuff. You make an argument about why you think it's worth your time or not,
Mhm.
and then or why it's worth someone picking up and considering, and trying to compare things because like how do you compare if it's the same scale, how do you
Mhm.
compare something that Fantagraphics are putting out or First Second are putting out and with a particular view and a particular intent behind it.
Yeah.
And the latest issue of Batman, like, is a 9 for you know we for Batman the same as a 9 for the indie graphic novel that is trying to do nothing like that have completely different audiences.
Right.
Like, it didn't make sense to me, so I tried to move away from that as much as I could and do kind of like why you should be reading style articles in the end. But you're totally right. Like, it's developing that language
Mhm.
to be able to do so, and reading widely is so important as part of that, both within comics and outside of comics.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited about When the Blood is Dried, because it was just like, this is different from anything I've read in comics. It reminds me, and the pitch, right, is like it's high fantasy meets like a spaghetti western, and it's like funny enough, my wife and I went through a western kick, and so it's like it does remind me of some things that I've seen in film, and so like even though there are elements that I've seen in other places before, it feels fresh because I've not read that in a comic. And that's really cool. So you have this passion. You know you want to be involved in comics, so you're writing these reviews for these websites to kind of stay fresh and keep the pen sharpened. But the practice of making comics, now that you've got your big boy job and you can pay artists, what are the types of things that you guys are making?
So I went to an event in 2017 called Small Press Day. It's an event that is held in Ireland, the UK, where essentially it's kind of a showcase for local comic creators. So having moved from the kind of second city, Cork, to the capital, Dublin, I was also exposed to a wider comics creating community. And so there
Mm,
was this event on in 2017, and I on the I said, okay, I'm going to go along to that and see what's happening in the scene in Ireland. Because also one of the things it was doing that year, there was a lot of workshops. So there was going to be essentially alongside, you know, artists trading Artist Alley style,
mm,
Comic Con style. There would also be, okay, coloring in comics, writing in comics, putting together your first comic. So I went along to that and essentially sat in the panel hall all day and took it all in. And at the end of it, I was like, okay, I think I've got a better grasp of, having had that initial experience about 8 years earlier, or however many years earlier. I have a better grasp of what it takes and what I should be doing and what I should not be doing. So I shouldn't be going off trying to write my 100 issue epic. I need to
Mm,
start smaller. And I kind of made a promise to myself that day that by the next edition, so by Small Press Day 2018, I'd behind one of, I would be behind one of the tables there with my first book. That was the kind of the
mm,
goal I set for myself. And the way I decided I was going to achieve that was I would essentially set aside the time to produce a 4 page comic every month. I
mm,
would write it, I would get it drawn, I would get it lettered, and I would post it on Twitter and I'd post it online so that people could see it and give me comments on it. And whether that was good, bad, or indifferent, it would allow me to finish something, get the experience of producing it, and get feedback from it. And if it was bad or if I'd failed in some way, well, at least I'd fail faster, and there
mm.
would I wouldn't be after committing you know thousands to it or committing you know plenty of pages to it. I could just experiment, scratch a particular creative itch
Right.
and move on. And I would learn from that experience and I would learn from doing. So even if it wasn't perfect, it was done and it was, examples to people that, I would not only could put my money where my mouth was and that I could actually produce stuff and produce it on a regular basis.
Mm,
And the ultimate idea being, okay, well, at the end of the year, I can have X amount of those stories. I'll put them together into a collection and I'll self-publish it. And that's something that, if I'm going to a convention, I can hand that to an editor as well.
right.
I can say, here are 10 stories I made myself over the last year, and
Mm,
here's what I've learned from them. And that would be my calling card. So, and that's what I did. I essentially spent the next year or so working on 4 pages. And the reason I used 4 pages is that you talk about Alan Moore
hmm.
earlier on, and I'm pretty sure I've actually looked at that because I think that video that you mentioned is actually part of his masterclass that he does for
Oh,
BBC.
okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and I did that as well a couple of years back, where I subscribed to it. But one of the things he says, and he's got a book about writing, but he's also obviously done many interviews and discussions about how to get into writing
Mm,
over the years. And he said that one of the best ways to learn how to write comics is to do what's called a future shock, the
mm,
future shock style from 2000 AD, which is that, it's for ages, I think it was 6 pages, but now it's 4 pages. And the idea with a future shock is that you tell a science fiction or a horror story, a bit like it that is kind of modeled after Twilight Zone. So it's a science fiction story with a twist at the end. But
mm,
you have to do it in 4 pages. So you've
mm,
got to set up your initial concept. You've got to introduce a character, what their conflict is, what they want, and then resolve that, but also resolve that with a stinger at the end,
mm.
so that people come away going, "Oh my God, that's like I could not imagine what that I didn't think that's where we were going," and things like that. So that I was also doing it that style for the most part. I was trying to produce these kind of future shock style, these style stories. Uh, One, because again those would be good ways of getting stuff out there and in
Mm.
that 4 page format.
Yeah.
But also I knew that there was opportunities to pitch to 2000 AD as well, both through their open submissions from a writing perspective, because
Mm,
they were for years they were one of the few publishing houses that actually accepted scripts. But also at Thoughtful, which is this comic arts festival that they hold in Leeds over in the UK,
mm,
there was an open mic pitch fest competition that they run every year. And
mm,
essentially you get 2 minutes to go up in front of the editor in chief and some of their best writers or their best staffers.
mm,
And you cold pitch them on a story. So yes, I get to work on material, I get to get it out there, I can
mm.
collect it at the end of the year, but I'm also trying to hone my craft with the view to pitching it to that or pitching stuff to 2000 AD or to a similar publishing house down the line. So I'm doing everything with a purpose.
Mm. Nice. Nice. And so somewhere along the line, you become involved in a collective. So tell me a little bit about Limit Break.
Yeah, so at that 2017 Small Press Day event, I meet two people. So I meet a lot of people on that day, but two people I get on really well with. And afterwards, we go for drinks and we talk about comics and we talk about making comics. Was Paul Carroll and Garrett Luby. And really, after we kind of hit it off straight away, and I convinced them to come out for drinks afterwards and to talk about things. And we really just kind of like we had the same similar passion
Mm.
for comics. And I had kind of told them my lofty plan of, okay, I'm gonna do a 4 pager every month and put it out there for people to see online. And they were very supportive of that. And we had kind of on an informal basis said that because they were looking to level up their comic game. I think they'd done one or two comics beforehand together, but they
Gotcha.
wanted to do something longer and they wanted to do something more collaborative
Mm.
and ongoing because the two of them work on a series called Meouch, a small press series called Meouch, which is about uh, this cat assassin, this Deadpool as meets Rocket Raccoon style character, and they'd been working on that character and they wanted to do more with that character too. So we just said, we became fast friends, and we said we kind of would keep tabs on each other, trying to make sure that everyone is progressing forward. If I said I was doing a script a month, they'd be there. If it was week 3 and there was nothing happening, going, so Gary, where's that script?
Mm.
If you want to get that story out there, if you want to get this to an artist or you want to collaborate with someone, you're going to need to crank it out.
Right.
And likewise, if they were working on something, I would push them along, or I'd review what they had written or what they were working on and say, well, you could do this, you could do that. You
Mm.
might push it this way. And that was all informal for ages. It was just ourselves doing it.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't anything formal, or there wasn't a collective or a publishing house in mind or
Mm.
anything like that. But over the course of that year and going to events, whether it's signings or other similar small press events, and talking about things, we had this notion of, well, if we're doing this, and we also were attending courses, the Irish Writer Centre had started to put on comic creation courses.
Mm.
So PJ Holden, who's an artist for 2000 AD, did one, and then later Declan Shalvey, who has done many things as a writer and artist,
Yes.
Marvel, everyone. So it basically worked for everyone at this point.
Right.
There was 2 of those courses on, so we went along to those courses as well together as a group,
Mm.
and we decided essentially that, look, if we were doing this informally and we were going to be supporting each other informally, a rising tide raises all the boats,
Hmm.
and if we came together, we could kind of pool our resources so that if I went to a convention and then the other 2 guys were stuck and they weren't able to attend, I could bring their books along and vice versa,
Yeah.
and we could present a kind of a united front. Because particularly in small press, you're working, on small enough margins, but you're also, you're working with your own resources, so you have to pull together where you can.
Right.
So from that came the idea of, oh, well, we can work. We didn't want to be a publisher. We didn't want to be someone who was like accepting submissions or publishing other people's work. We really just
Hmm.
wanted to push our own work and to push each other.
Yeah.
So we decided this kind of collective style thing where we base very much on there's a collective, a writers collective and a creators collective called White Noise in the UK,
Uh-huh.
which has the likes of Rom V, Alex Packnadell, Dan Waters, and then
Mm.
so we were kind of modeling it a bit like that to an extent. Or we
Gotcha.
saw that as one of the examples of what we wanted to do.
Mm.
And from there we came up with the idea of Limit Break. I think it was coming back from a convention in Cork.
Mm.
We decided, okay, we're going to do this, and we were spitballing names back and forth. And because we were trying to push ourselves and to improve ourselves and improve our craft, we came up with this idea of a limit break,
Mm.
and it turned out that Square Enix hadn't trademarked it, so it was perfectly acceptable to use it as a comic as a name for a comic collective. But
Nice.
it was very much us trying. There wasn't an idea of publishing anyone else's work or doing big, massive anthologies. It was just a framing device or a method for us to support each other
Mm.
and our own self-publishing initiatives. And if it became something else, or if it became something bigger and it was very successful, so be it. But really, it was just a way for 3 friends to support their fledgling creative endeavors.
Got you, man. And I mean, I'm just looking over you guys' website and I see Meouch up here. I see mixtape. Um, there's like a lot of just really cool looking things here, life and death, lens. Um, but what I love about just sort of the studio collective, because we see it with Ron V and Dan Waters, like you said. But it's like there's people making different kinds of books. And so it's like if you like one, you'll probably like the other because people that get along well typically have some sort of common interests, right? So you guys wouldn't be working together or hanging out if you didn't like each other's work. And so, like you said, that rising tide raises all boats. And it's like, okay, well, I don't want to just check out him. I want to check out all of them. So that's really cool.
No, no, it was like it was. I think it's something that's worked out well in the end, and it's expanded from, those kind of smaller anthologies like Life and Death and Mixtape to the Kickstarter crowdfunded anthologies where we kind of mash up a folklore or a mythology
Mm,
with an established genre, be it sci-fi, noir crime stories, or horror. And that
gotcha.
gave, Limit Break and Irish creators, but also other international creators, a platform. So we went from those kind of small beginnings to these bigger anthologies that got our names and the collectors' names out there to a wider audience too.
Nice. And so you talked about like as you're honing your skills, you're telling these sci-fi stories with a twist, right? You've kind of locked yourself into a genre just to get better at the craft of writing. But what are the genres that interest you when it comes to writing?
For a long while, I thought, I'd be, more of a kind of a sci-fi writer or things like that. Like that was kind of like, where I saw myself.
Hmm.
Again, maybe because I was, trying to fit that model of what what a future shock was and kind of trying to hold my craft for that perspective. But I
Hmm.
found in writing those short stories every month, I really enjoyed crime. Crime was a genre where I hadn't really written much of it, even from a prose perspective. Because say
Hmm.
growing up, when I was doing, my own like short stories and things like
Hmm.
that, just even from or proto novels or novels that I'd start.
Hmm.
Crime wouldn't have been one of the things that I would be have been exploring. But say
Hmm.
urban fantasy was
Yeah.
like the kind of the fantasy with a twist in the modern day.
Hmm.
And I thought for ages, oh, maybe it's just the fantasy element I like. But no, it turned out that it was the crime element I enjoyed a lot too.
Got
So
you.
I ended up after doing Declan's class, because Declan obviously is someone who's worked a lot in crime and like crime fiction. I kind of use that as an opportunity to go, well, look, I'll give writing crime a try. So part of the assignments we had for the class was to write a 3-page crime story. So I
Hmm.
wrote that and, got feedback, and Deck was very, very complimentary and says, I think you've got actually a voice for crime here. And so
Hmm.
I tried exploring that more, which led to things like Lens, which is kind of this espionage spy book, crime book about a photojournalist who moonlights as an assassin.
Hmm.
And I really enjoyed writing crime, and so that's one that's kind of been tipping away in the background. So a lot of the stories I wrote in the years that followed, even if they were like science fiction or if they were horror, things like that, might have a crime twist to it.
Hmm.
So crime is something I like, but I still science fiction and fantasy was still an area I wanted to explore, and I wanted to go back to because particularly growing up as well, I thought that I'd be a fantasy novelist. I
Hmm.
thought I'd spend a lot of time working on being a fantasy novelist, and I couldn't tell you, man, how many fancy novels I started, and 3 chapters in was like, all right, this is terrible. And
Hmm.
for whatever reason, I'm not getting it. I'm not engaging with it. I don't want to pursue this
Right.
anymore. This thing anymore. But yeah, it was crime for a long time
Got
until
you.
I decided to revisit fantasy later.
So I know for me, the disconnect that I've had with fantasy um, is really the patience for the world building. I think that's what often takes me out of fantasy books, right? Like it's because I'm looking at it, or well, I don't really read a ton of prose anymore, but it's like they're describing like orcs and like these different creatures, right? I have the same struggle with like sci-fi. Like it took me forever to get into Star Wars because for a long while, it's just me looking like, okay, who am I looking at? What is this? Like we go into the cantina, there's the blue guy, the green guy, the purple guy. Oh, it doesn't matter who they are because they're just patrons in this Western saloon, is what
Mm.
it is, right? But it's like it takes me a while to look at it and then relate it back to a concept that I know. And I'm often not patient enough to see that through, right? I'm curious to know, though, what it was that you felt wasn't working when you're trying to write the fantasy novel.
No, I think you've grasped it to a large extent. Like
Mm.
a lot of it comes down to, I think I'd overindulge a lot because like when I was also growing up, it was the perfect time for the resurgence of high fantasy because it was the time when the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out and became the
Right.
biggest thing on the planet, right?
Yeah.
And so that obviously meant that the Lord of the Rings books became widely read again. They were always widely
Mm.
read. They were, obviously seminal works of literary and fantasy fiction.
Right.
But, suddenly everyone and their mother was reading them again.
Mm.
And you had so many high fantasy then became the thing that, everyone was churning out. So everyone suddenly had a high fantasy series
Mm.
if they hadn't before. And I was reading a lot of that stuff and I was kind of, overindulging on it because I was reading everything that was out there
Mm.
at the time. And I think a lot of it is, as you kind of pointed out, is that there's a lot of this lofty world building, but there's sometimes you wonder what's the point of it.
Hmm.
Like, is it world building for the sake of world building? Is it for the sake of someone at the start going, it was a time of darkness, it was an age of heroes,
Right.
or things like that? And the world building is done in place of character, and
Mm.
there's no effort to try to make the characters, people you should care about
Mm.
because it's about the lore. It's
Right.
about, the history of the
Yeah.
world. And look, that's fine too. Like there's to each their own. There's a lot of people who enjoy that. You can go on YouTube and watch however many videos of, the lore of Game of Thrones or the lore of Warhammer or anything like that.
Right.
And that's fine. But unless there's characters you care about and, there are stakes that you're invested in, whether they're small or large, then you're not going to have a good time.
Right.
I think a lot of time when I was writing it, I was getting caught up with the world building of it all.
Mm.
I was there trying to build these vast empires or build these vast, you know, universes, rather than coming back to a simple question of like, well, why should anyone care? Who are the characters? What do they want? Do they deserve to get it? And what happens if they don't get it?
Mm.
Those kind of basic storytelling questions
Yeah.
that ultimately you have to ask in every single story, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, or whatever. And
Right.
if you can't answer those, or if you don't have good answers to those questions, then it's probably not a story worth telling.
Right.
And I think that was what it was really when I started like putting the emphasis from that perspective and really focusing on that. That was when I realized, okay, that's why my kind of, proto fantasy novels, those drafts that I was also just writing, seat of your pants and I had no
Mm.
plan for and was just making up on the fly. That's why they weren't working because I wasn't asking those questions and I wasn't trying to find a character to connect with. I
Mm.
was more interested in trying to build a world. And it was really when I started thinking about it from character's perspective that it clicked more. And yeah, that was something that really kind of came about, when I again having moved to Dublin, for the first time I started playing Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role playing. And
Mm.
that really like, made me kind of connect, go, okay, the fantasy doesn't need to be epic the whole time. It doesn't need to be world shattering. You can have the stakes be small,
Right.
and that can be your way in.
Right. That's funny because what I was going to say was, um, without the character, it can feel like you're just reading someone's D&D campaign, right? Like, and I think that's the I guess one of the pitfalls, or the sort of potential potholes. Sorry, somebody's like drag racing on my street or something. But yeah, so I think that focus on character is super important. And to that point, right, I think that's the perfect segue into uh when the blood is dried, because you open this book with this scene, like we open it in flashback, but I mean, for all we know, it's present day, and we see this girl in this really like dire situation, and then we thrust her a few years into the future, or a little while into the future, and then she started a whole new life. You know, the fact that she survived this thing that she's gone through, that's crazy in and of itself. But she started this whole new life, and we're already invested just in the fact that she's there. And then we're slowly, given, okay, well, here's what she's up against. And this mysterious figure from her past. Like he just shows up, and what's going to happen? How's this going to go? And I was hooked. Like I was hooked from the opening sequence. And I told you that in our message. And I'm sure, a big part of that is just due was partly due to Daniel Romeo, who just does a masterful job on the art for this book. But tell us a little bit about the concept for this book and where it came from.
Yeah, so the elevator pitch for this, I often say, is that it's Red Sonja meets Unforgiven. Or someone else again gave me the good one recently. It's a mixture of a history of violence and Baldur's Gate. And
Mm,
so our main character is Maeve, and she's someone who was formerly an adventurer in the high fantasy sense. So she was someone who was part of a party of adventurers, a band of sellswords,
mm,
and her relationship with that group ended badly. She tried to get out and found that, a bit like a crime gang, getting out is a lot harder than getting in. And you
right.
don't ever really leave,
Yeah.
or you don't leave in one piece.
Mm,
So, and she's left for reasons which are explored somewhat in the series, but really the fact that she left and that she felt the need to leave is the incident.
mm,
And so, cut to a couple of years later, she has left. She's managed to survive leaving, and she's established herself as the bartender or the innkeeper in this rural town, which is very much inspired by the kind of rural Irish towns I grew up around, in
mm,
terms of the way characters speak, their particular cultural hang-ups and things like
mm,
that. And she's become accepted by the town as the barkeep, but then finds that the guild, the party that she left, has decided to come to town, has decided to set up an outpost in that little sleepy lakeside town,
mhm,
and suddenly everything from the past is now on the table. The risk of the townsfolk finding out that she was part of this rogue band of adventurers who
mm,
portray themselves as sellswords, but really they're mercenaries. Like that's the key thing to it.
mm,
And so, what would they do if they found out that was her past? And what if the truth of the guild and what it is came to light?
mm,
And she has to try to hold on to this little bit of peace she's managed to carve out for herself, knowing that she may have done a lot of bad things in the past. She can't necessarily make up for that. She can't. Forgiveness might not be on the table, but she's been trying to live this better life. So she's got to try to hold on to that, and wondering, if I hold on to it too tight, is it going to be crushed in the process? And so that's the journey we take Maeve on over the 5 issues that we have.
mm.
Is very much focused on the local, the parochial of it all, set in the one town as Maeve's past quickly catches up with her.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a great concept, right? Like I said, I'm reading this Zorro comic right now. Sean Gordon Murphy's got a
Oh
Zorro
yeah, yeah.
comic, and it's like this guy. I don't know if he got hit on his head or what, but like he thinks he's Zorro, like I don't know if he's possessed or what's going on. But his sister's like, dude, like you're not Zorro. Like Zorro's not real. But the big thing is Zorro is like this folk hero. And as the series progresses, the drug cartel has like taken over this small town. And it's like this very like traditional Spanish town, right? It's like old folklore type stuff.
Mm,
And this guy is like, no, we're gonna fight against the cartel. We're gonna like, fight, build the resistance, and everybody will be fine. It's like there's comedy there because he's fighting the drug cartel who's got all these high powered weapons, and he's just got like a sword and a horse. And it's like, yo, what are you doing right now? Um, but that idea of the community rallying around this figure, right? That's something I see in When the Blood is Dried as well. It's like she's ingrained herself into this community. These are her people. She's left some of her ways behind in a way. Um, but maybe she's not quite as rusty as we might expect her to be. And it's like, okay, is the town going to be turned toward this bard or this party that she just left with all the charisma and charm? or are they going to like stick with her as sort of one of their own? Do they see her as one of their own? Like I love like just all the different layers of tension in the story. It's great to me.
Yeah, but no, you've community is such a big part of the book, and I'm glad that that kind of stuck with you from the
Mm,
your experience of what you've read so far. Because I think in the first issue, you spend a lot of time in the town in terms of
hmm.
setting it up as a character of itself.
Yeah.
And what you said there about, does the town rally behind her or not? That's one of the big questions we have in the series,
Mm,
and a lot of that stems from this notion that we have in Ireland, like particularly in a lot of kind of these rural communities. There's this idea of the blow-in, and it's someone who is not necessarily from the town. Sometimes they're someone who's from overseas, you know, who has moved into these rural towns. It's something that happens a lot, or maybe might be someone who's just from a couple of towns over from the city.
hmm.
And they could be there for years. They could be there for 20, 30 years. They could have had, entire lives there. But they're always considered the blow-in. They're always considered the outsider to an extent. There's always an asterisk
Yeah.
to their participation in the community. They're more than welcome. They're made to feel at home. But there's
Right.
always the jab, at the pub, being like, Asher, you're only a blow-in. What would you know about this place?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that they could have been there for 40 years at that point, that they'll,
Right.
they'll always be the blow-in. So that's one of the things that kind of hangs over Maeve as well. And, the townsfolk, because a lot of one of the things we try to do with the book as well is to give this very uniquely Irish flavor to fantasy.
Mm,
So a lot of the terminology, a lot of the place names and the character names and the way they speak is influenced by, growing up in Ireland, the kind of, what how people speak in Ireland, particularly these kind of rural towns.
mm,
So you'll see characters refer to Maeve and some of the other people as blow-ins, as
mm.
a way of kind of like setting them apart from everyone else and saying, look, there's always a condition to
Yeah,
you being welcomed here.
man. And you've talked a little bit online about just sort of using this opportunity to maybe reclaim some things that we've seen in literature or films that do have Irish heritage, but maybe aren't always attributed that way. Um, Maybe what are a few examples of those things that maybe we've seen all over the place but didn't know where they came from?
I think a lot of the time, so much of high fantasy is kind of influenced by the Tolkien of it all, or it comes from a British tradition of high fantasy that
Mm,
is, to some extent, it's one that is influenced by imperialism and colonialism to an extent.
yeah.
So one of the reasons why that we try to bring this kind of Irish sensibility to it is, because Irish sensibilities are not that.
Mm,
They're very much anti those kind of things.
mm,
So, but in terms of the cultural, the language, and that element to it, a lot of time you would see, Irish words being thrown in as this kind of like discount Elvish, as or
mm,
a stand-in for world building. Something's mystical, it's magical, and it has an Irish name to it.
mm.
Therefore, it must be magical, or it must have this otherworldly sense to it. And it's done in place of, actual world building or actual research, you
Mm,
know, and it's just a stand-in. It has the fact that it's Irish or it has Irish origins has no meaning,
right.
and that's not always the case. But that's something that, the, you know, paint by numbers high fantasy, you would see that a lot.
Yeah.
And, it's something that as someone who's, a fluent Irish speaker and who like thinks that's an important part, that I would see it and it would just bug me. Like it's like you can joke about it in some sense, and like I remember there's one episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer
Mm,
where Giles takes out this big tome, going, "This is an ancient Celtic text. It tells of a spell of binding," and it's the Irish language bus timetable for Dublin at the time, right? It doesn't actually say anything. Basically, it's like literally someone took the Irish language version of the bus timetable and put it in. So there's nothing like that I think, but it's really kind of like people who would use Irish or use the trappings of Irish or things to like as a kind of stand-in for world building or like something mystical. And that was
mm,
kind of one thing that I wanted to change to say, okay, if you're going to put these elements in, then you know have a reason for doing so, rather
mm.
than just, oh, this is like, instead of doing my own Elvish, this is what Elvish sounds like.
Right. Got you, man. I can't sing the praises of this book enough, right? Issue one just came out last week, April 10th. Issue two, I want to say, is out May 15th. Is that right?
May 15, yeah.
And this is being published by Mad Cave Studios, and the quality on it is just great. Like I said, I mean, for as much as I'm talking about the world building and the character, like the writing is amazing, right? And in the same token, so is the art, right? There's a lot of books where it's like, okay, the writing's okay, the art was great though, or the art was okay, but it was a good story, so I'm sticking with it, right? There's such a marriage of the visuals with the writing, and it works so well. Can you talk a little bit about the artist and how you guys' process has been throughout these issues?
Yeah, D Daniel Romero is like one of my best friends in comics.
Mm,
He is an amazing artist from Chile who I had the fortune of meeting very early on in my writing career. So back when I was putting together those short stories we spoke about earlier,
mm,
I would put the call out on Twitter. I'd put the call out on various forums back then that were there for kind of matchmaking artists and writers.
mm,
And I came across Daniel through one of those forums. And he was someone who was, eager, driven, wanted to get comics out there, a bit like myself. And so we collaborated on a short story for the first anthology mixtape that I did. And
mm,
from the moment that we were working together, I was like, one, this guy's super talented. Like he
mm,
just has the chops from storytelling perspective, from a draftsman perspective as well. So it's not does he know how to actually, to make something work and how to make sure everything flows, but he can then sell it with like this really hyper detailed art.
yeah.
And we got on like a house of on fire, and we really really enjoyed working together and had similar tastes and similar goals. We both wanted to make a go of it and try to break in and to tell larger stories.
Mm,
So it was always the kind of unspoken thing between us that if either of us had an idea that we thought we could that we had a good shot at and we thought was something worth investing the 100 pages that a mini series is, or something
mm,
like that, that we would go to each other and we would work together for it.
mm,
So over the years, Daniel and I did various short stories together, and then in around 2019, 2020, I reached out to him going like, remember we said that if we had that idea that we'd come to each other. Well, I think I
mm,
have the idea,
mm.
and so I sent him a couple of ideas, and he immediately went, when the blood is dried. This one here about the retired adventurer in the kind of spaghetti western setting, like that immediately stuck out to him. And Daniel
Mm,
at that point had been doing a lot of commissions and work for hire for tabletop RPGs. So he'd been doing a lot of kind of high fantasy style things for various source books, but also people would commission him to draw their party and things like that. So it
mm,
really kind of it was expanding upon work he'd already been doing.
mm.
But like like as you said, like Daniel's work is like every time I get an email with a new page from Daniel, I'm just super excited
Yeah.
because one of the things he's so good at is character acting. Like he can
Mm,
sell like there'd be so many times where I'd write a script and I might have dialogue, to explain things, and I come back going, oh, I can cut this because Daniel has told the reader everything they need to know with a single glance, with
right.
a single look from a character. I don't need this dialogue anymore. That kind of, grouchy stare that she's given, that kind of that's enough that sells it. And he can do that kind of character acting thing, or he can do the broad, you know, map view of the town and
Hmm.
really kind of sell you on that too. Like he's got it all, man. He
Yeah.
just has it all.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm like, I keep going back to this opening sequence because I think it shows a lot, and I'm gonna do the extra work to superimpose it on the screen for the viewers. Um,
ooh, I feel special.
but there's this actually I might be able to just share it. Give me just a second to close out of some of this stuff here. Um, Let me download this and then I'll put it on the screen. But anyway, as I'm working on that, this opening sequence is real. It's the it's the page turns that are really awesome to me. Like or the camera angles. It's like you start, you're looking at her footprints on the ground, and then you're looking at a close up of her face, like as she's running. Then you get a shot of the sword and the knife or the dagger, and then you get another. Let's look at her. We're looking at the ground, but we're seeing her reflection in these puddles in the rain, and it's just like, okay, I'm in. I am in this world. It is a muddy, rainy swampland, and I want to know what's about to happen. And even the colors, right? It's like this super like reddish and red and orange and brown. And so it's like part of it is okay, it kind of invokes blood, but it's also like this sort of sunset, like dusk time, and it's great. Um, but again, what I really love is like the close-ups and then like the medium shots, but it's like the way he turns the figures in space, like, and gives us so many different angles of the same piece of action. It's like that's just masterful work. It is amazing.
Like you, I love Daniel's colors. I think Daniel, this is one of the first time that Daniel has colored himself. So that like
Mm,
to give listeners context, not only is Daniel doing all the line work, but he's also doing the colors as well. And it really allows him to give, the mood of the piece a lot more, emphasis. So
right.
he obviously sells you on the line work and the draftsmanship, but then like he has in that opening sequence, as you say, the dark reds, the kind of like let you know that this is a grim and gritty world. But then later
Hmm.
on, he has kind of more brighter times, and
Yeah.
he just like he has this wonderful way of communicating mood and communicating emotion through his colors. So
Right.
like, and there is, and up until that point, Daniel hadn't colored a lot of his own work, but he comes from an animation background, so you can kind of see immediately where where that study and where that education kind of comes in, because then he
Mm,
knows how to make you feel through the colors too, and it
right.
really really works so well.
It is awesome. Now, so this is like the first that idea that you felt like could break through. Is this you guys' first, like, I guess, major comic, so to speak?
Yes, yeah, no, this is our both of our first comic in the direct market. It's our first comic with a publisher that wasn't me self-publishing it through Limit Break or smaller press anthologies. So it's our
Wow.
first breakthrough in that sense.
Wow. What a debut. That is awesome. Um, yeah, man, this series is great. It's 5 issues. Like I said, issue 1 is already out from Mad Cave Studios. So if it's not sold out in the direct market, go ahead, order it. You can order it online, order it through your LCS. If Diamond still has stock, they can special order it. It'll be at your shop in like a week or two. Like, you need to grab issue 1. Do you know if it's getting a second printing at all?
There's no word on this as of yet, but
Okay.
as you said, I'm pretty sure that if your viewers or your listeners contact their shop, they should be able to either get one through Diamond, or they can go directly to Mad Cave's website as well and order a copy of issue 1, and they'll be able to get it just in time for when issue two comes out in May.
Yes. So issue 2 will be out May 15th. And like I
Mhm.
said, I mean, you said it's a 5 issue series.
Yeah,
I,
yeah, it's a five.
That's cool. It's a 5 issue series. I'm kind of upset because I'm not upset, but I feel bad because I've read more than what's out, right? I'll say that. I won't spoil anything. But 5 issues is not enough time to me to spend in this world. I have full confidence that the story is going to resolve and resolve well because it's just that good. Um, but man, like 5 issues feels too short. But I guess if there's any reaction you want from an audience, it's the fact that they would want more. So you've got that going for sure.
No, definitely. And like we always pitch this as a 5 issue series. This is this story, Maeve's story, has an arc. It comes to a definitive end that's satisfying. But look, if it turns out that the book sells gangbusters and people want more, there are
Mm,
more areas of this world we could explore if given the opportunity.
mm.
But that very much depends on the readers. But like, we're happy with the 5 issues we put together, and we've been working on it for the last year. So it's there's no risk in that sense. But it's yeah, it is like a fantasy novel. It has its beginning, middle, and end, and it comes to what I hope is a satisfying end for and people that the readers will enjoy. But you might be a little bit brokenhearted at the end.
Oh man, man. Okay, I don't want to speculate. So, so issue one's out. Issue two will be out May 15th. You guys go ahead, pre-order the series. Go ahead and subscribe. When you subscribe, it gets the numbers up before the books are printed. So one, it guarantees your copy, but it also serves as a signal to the publisher, like, hey, people like this series. Let's put more stuff like this out there. And then it also helps people like Gary to get more work in the future, right? So speaking of that future work, what sort of plans do you have in store for the rest of the year?
So I'm always working on new stories to pitch and you know shop around and to put for publishers. So that's always working in the background. There's nothing I can really talk about from that sense.
Mm,
Limit Break, as we've been doing for the last number of years since the pandemic, really is always working on new mythology and folklore anthologies. We kind of do one of those a year that's supported by an open call.
mm,
So we have one this year called Wish Upon a Star, which is classic fairy tales meets science fiction.
mm,
So we're going to be working on that and bringing that back to crowdfunding later on the year. So working on new stuff, working on that. But one of the cool kind of work for hire projects I've managed to get over the last while is the Irish language translation of the Flash Gordon newspaper strip, which
mm,
just started today. So today we're recording on the 18th for you, just the 19th for me now.
mm,
But the so Dan Scotty's Flash Gordon newspaper strip that's been running since October.
mm,
An Irish company here has gotten the rights to reprint it, but to reprint it as Gaeilge. So I've
mm.
been assisting with the translation of that and to adapting it so that it can be available here in Irish. So that's one of the things I'll be working on for the rest of the year for a kind of weekly release.
Nice. That is awesome. Well, look, guys, again, when the blood is dried, I'm gonna keep saying this, the title of this book until you like run into your shop, like, okay, I have to have this. Um, but Gary, where can people learn more about you or follow you for updates in the future?
So I'm on all it's very difficult these days to figure out where on social media you should be posting.
Right.
But I'm on Twitter, I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram. If people type in Gary Moloney, they should find me
Okay.
uh, in various things. Or you can go to the Limerick Break website, and there's links to our self-published stuff, but you'll also be able to find the links to my socials there as well.
Awesome. And that website is limitbreakcomics.com. Uh, so awesome, awesome. Well, Gary, again, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for reaching out to me because if you hadn't, I don't know if I would have found this work, but I'm so glad you did. And thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
No problem at all. Well, guys, again, I don't know what you're doing today, but stay safe till next time. Stay awesome and read something dope today. Peace.